You're listening to Voces, Críticas, Critical Voices. I am your producer and host, Silvana Falcón. Today I'm here with Professor Micah Perks. Micah Perks is an award-winning writer and professor of literature here at UC Santa Cruz. She's written 4 books, her most recent being a collection of linked short stories entitled True Love and Other Miraculous Dreams of Escape. Her work has been published in Tin House, Zizava, the Massachusetts Review, and many other places. She received her BA and MFA from Cornell University. 5 of her stories have been nominated for Pushcart Prizes. She co-directs the creative writing program at UC Santa Cruz. Welcome, Micah, to Voces Críticas.
Thank you so much.
So I'm really excited to talk to you about this new book, but let's first talk about your upbringing. You grew up in a commune. I can honestly say I've never met anyone who's grown up in a log cabin in a commune. So tell me about your childhood.
The log cabin was in the Adirondack Mountains of New York State. And when I think about my childhood, the first thing I think about is trees. We were surrounded by 500 acres of forever wild state forest. And it was a farm surrounded by trees. And there was about 40 to 50 of us, and I had a very wild childhood, and I loved it. It was incredible freedom, incredible playfulness. Just for example, the whole commune every year would divide up into different groups. It was supposedly that we were studying history, so we would be the Spartans and the Athenians, or we would do World War II, and we would have these battles for days on end. That could get a little scary for me as a child. I think maybe for the adults as well, but also incredibly imaginative and playful. I went to a 2-room schoolhouse. We had a building on the commune that the older kids were in one room and the little kids were in the other. And there were 13 kids. And that too was a place of great imagination and freedom. Just for example, we had 2 teachers, one for each room, Carol and Sandy, and they took turns reading to us at one point. They read us the entire Narnia series. And when we came to the last book, The Last Battle, we were so into it that we literally spent hours, the entire day, just sitting there listening to them read that book to us. And I think they addicted all of us who went there to reading and to imagination. And when we weren't reading, we were doing other projects or we were running around in the woods. And I would say it was a harsh childhood in some ways. A little brutal, but also very beautiful and very open, tremendous freedom.
And so the title of your book is True Love and Other Dreams of Miraculous Escape. Tell me the story behind this title. And did you consider other titles in the production of this book?
I didn't really think of other titles. I always dreamed to have a book of short stories. I love short stories, and I always wanted to be a part of the Short Story Writers Club. I thought they were so cool. Let's see, I had 3 books before this, but I kept writing stories in between. And so after I finished my last book in 2016, I thought, okay, now maybe I could have a book of short stories. I have enough short stories, and I put them all out on the floor. It was on my bedroom floor, and I was walking around, and I printed out the beginning and the ending of each story, and I was looking at them and thinking, could this be a short story collection? And I thought, no. This is not going to work, because I had written them over, a 10-year period. And the example I always give is, so in one story, there was this Chilean chemist with this brilliant smile. And then in another story, there is an Argentinian literature professor with a brilliant smile. In another story, this Chilean activist with a brilliant smile, and they're all bald. And my husband is a bald Chilean with a brilliant smile. And I just thought, this is ridiculous. Like, what is this? It's, it might even be racist. Like, why are there all these Latinos that all look the same? So
they all have a brilliant smile.
Exactly. So I started there, and I thought, okay, either I have to really change up the stories and make them all really different, or I have to connect them and link them up. And so I did spend a few days plopping hair on the head of one Chilean and, trying to make them different. Didn't really go anywhere. They were the same person. They just had hair on their head. Then I ended up thinking, okay, so this has to be one person. So I have to change these characters all into one person. I changed the setting to all be in Santa Cruz. And then if that person's the same, then everyone around them has to be similar. It was kind of like this shifting puzzle where once you make one change, that ripples out, to mix a lot of metaphors, but that moves out, and then I have to change this and I have to change that. And, 6 months later, it was a very different collection. I had to cut pieces too because I couldn't get them to fit. I sort of did it in several stages. And to go back to the title, True Love and Other Dreams of Miraculous Escape. I think I thought of that pretty early, and I've long known that an obsession I have had throughout my writing life and before is both a intense attraction to community and connection and love and intimacy, and also claustrophobia, like a desire for escape. I'm sure that comes from where I grew up, right? So we were talking about that I grew up on a commune, and that was both wonderful and supportive and exciting, but also deeply claustrophobic. So I think I've always had that tension. And then I think love, or the idea of true love, is in many ways, it's that desire for some kind of transcendent emotion that in a strange way is also a kind of escape, because it's a transformative experience that pulls you out of the mundane and into something different, someplace different, something heightened. So I think that title comes from that idea that true love is a miraculous escape and is a story we tell ourselves, and also a decision we make to do that. And at the same time, true love is also something that feels, as it moves along, something that can feel claustrophobic as any other unit.
So you've got all of these stories, you've laid them out.
Yeah.
How long does it take you then to actually now piece it together for this book?
Well, I was super lucky because I was on sabbatical. So, from the moment where I put those stories out on the floor, it was probably about 9 months. I was in a writer's residency for a month. It was super intense, where I did one big revision process. And then I showed it to some people. They gave me feedback, and I did another big revision process. And then I showed it to my editor. He wanted me to do some more linkages and more revision. And so it was sort of in 3 stages. It's hard because those stories almost all of them had already been published. So there was a sense that they were done, and they were very tight in the way that short stories are. And so at first, opening them up was difficult because each sentence was exactly as I had wanted it at that moment. But once I started messing with them and making them messy again, then the possibilities opened up. And each stage was sort of a wrenching out of preconceptions and looking at possibilities and looking at ways that they could be linked up that I hadn't recognized before. For example, one of the things I did was realize in the second stage of the revision process, I realized that, for example, this man in this story is very much like this woman here. So I'm going to change this woman here into a man. And then that's super interesting. So now she's a man, and how does that change the story or not change the story? So I had a lot of exciting kind of aha moments around gender, sexuality, just by making the characters one person rather than many.
You also managed to weave in politics into your stories. And in this particular book, you're talking about the Middle East, you're talking about the Chilean dictatorship, you're talking about the current U.S. political situation. And so as a writer, why do you decide to make these references to political matters? For example, in this case, in these interconnected short stories.
I can only answer this as a second wave feminist, but I'd say that the personal is political, and it doesn't feel like, oh, now I'm going to add some political dimension. It's more like these are preoccupations of my own life and life of my friends and family. And so I think it would feel strange not to talk about it, because we talk about politics at the dinner table and all during the day. I think the word political makes it sound like it's distant or theoretical, but as we all know, politics affect people deeply. My husband was in Chile during the dictatorship. It profoundly affected his family. They had to flee to Argentina. Then they went back. He and his brother protested and risked their lives protesting for democracy. So it's not something academic.
When 45 got elected, I felt like I was hearing more and more stories about divorces and separations and all kinds of things that had fallen apart. I think your point here about the political realm or politics enters all our lives in all kinds of ways and can lead to ruptures, displacement, and other kinds of pain in a family.
Absolutely. And I like that you're saying 45 because I try not to say that name. But yeah, that was a deep shock and trauma for many people, including me, and trying to understand where is this place that I live that elected that person felt very shocking and very challenging and depressing. And that was something that I felt that my characters were also grappling with.
I really appreciate your approach to this love story between Sadie and Daniel in a sort of complicated way. And it's a binational love story, which I also really liked. And it made me think about all the love stories that happened between residents and its temporary visitors. Do you think it's important to think about love across these national boundaries and to actually recognize that these binational love stories are happening all the time, everywhere throughout the world?
Absolutely. And I think borders are impediments to love of all kinds, and not just romantic love. I think that we need to recognize the incredible heartbreak that borders create in all different levels, but also in that level as well, in the simple separation of loved ones, families, etc. It's simply pain. And I think that's super important and an incredible, ugly reality that we're dealing with in the U.S. right now and in many countries.
And thinking about characters and places, Santa Cruz becomes now a place in this collection of stories, as does UC Santa Cruz. How does it feel to write about a place in a space that's so familiar to you? And what made you to decide, of all the sites in the rewriting process, why these familiar sites?
Good question. So when I first started rewriting, the stories took place all over the country and actually internationally as well. And then when I was trying to link them up, partially it was practical that the characters needed to be somewhere. They couldn't actually be all over the country. They had to live somewhere. And so this is a place that I know well. It's easy to access the setting. And I think it was a good setting for the characters. It's a multi-ethnic, multicultural, diverse group in many different kinds of ways. And I think Santa Cruz makes sense that would be a place where they would all kind of find themselves. I think that's, why Santa Cruz, in terms of how does it feel to write about Santa Cruz. Pretty easy, but also I think Santa Cruz is easy to do satire about or mock. It's a big place, the ocean's big, the boardwalk's big. A lot of the issues, homeless, hippies, vegan life, it's all pretty easy to mock and easy to inflate and make into like a joke. And I don't think Santa Cruz is a joke. And so the challenge is to make it thick and a real place where we all live our lives.
So, Micah, I know you have gone to these writing residencies, and I'd love for you to talk about the one, Blue Mountain Center. Tell us about what takes place at these writing residencies, how you prepare maybe for a writing residency, and would you recommend one for perhaps a new writer?
Writing residencies it's incredible. You feel like you've dined and gone to heaven. It's writer heaven. It really is. They're usually in very beautiful places. The other people there are all super interesting. The particular one that I went to, the Blue Mountain Center, is on a lake in the Adirondacks. They feed you and you don't have to do anything else except for write. And there are, at least the Blue Mountain Center and many other places I know, they don't have great internet access. So that's also a nice invitation to unplug for a little bit. And there is nothing wrong. All I can tell you is at the Blue Mountain Center, they have 2 jars of homemade cookies that's refilled magically every day. There's really nothing bad to say about a writer's residency. They're hard to get into. But I absolutely recommend people to apply, and don't be discouraged if you don't get in. Just reapply. There's many of them. There's probably 50, and they're free. I wouldn't go to one where you have to pay. And keep trying, because there's some incredible places to visit, and it's just it's a moment where all you have to do is concentrate on your writing. I first went to the Blue Mountain Center when I was right out of grad school a few years. So I was a new writer. And for me, it was such an incredible gift to be treated like a writer, because I probably published just a couple stories. I felt so honored to be amongst published writers, and it was a game changer for me. And I wrote a lot of my first novel there.
So do you go to writing residencies like once a year? How often do you go?
I don't. I went then, and then once I had kids, I didn't go for many, many years. I didn't have a month to go away. And then I just recently started going again. I went for a week when the kids were young, and I went last year for the first time for a month again because our youngest went away to college, so we had the space.
So what advice would you give to somebody who's maybe interested, toying with the idea of becoming a fiction writer? Like, where should they start? What should they do? Maybe words of encouragement that you could offer.
Well, first, I always say, marry a rich person. That's partly a joke. But so you're going to need to have a day job or a rich husband or wife or partner or whatever. But other than that, I would say read. I think reading, and read everything. Read really eclectically. Read things that you love And I think that is the best advice I can give you. Read them carefully and try to figure out how they wrote it. How did they, whatever it is that you love about it, whether it's the plot, the characters, the voice, figure out how they did it so that you can copy, not plagiarize, but so that you can use their techniques, because those are the best teachers, are other writers, other published works. And then keep writing. I think if you can have a daily practice, a writer's group is good, but you don't have to have that. I think just reading and writing and then not giving up is the best thing, I would say.
And so who are you reading now? Who are some of your favorite authors or books?
One thing that I've recently read that I'm super obsessed with is Elena Ferrante. But the book that I love of hers is not part of the Neapolitan series. It's called The Lost Daughter. And I love that book. It's about this woman. She's middle-aged and her children have grown up, similar to me. And she goes on a vacation by herself to the ocean and adventure ensues. And it's an incredible book about being a woman in middle age and when your kids have grown up. And I read an amazing book by Lucy Bledsoe called Lava Flows. It's a book of linked stories, and all the characters are these survival women, and it takes place in Alaska, Antarctica, in the Grand Canyon. It's just really fun to read about these women who are, really brave, tough ladies and young women. So that's great. I'll say one other thing I'm reading, which I really love, and I'm going to actually teach this quarter, is a memoir called Mean by Miriam Gerba. And she's coming to UC Santa Cruz to read, and she's hilarious and she's mean in a really, I think, great way, and really take no prisoners way that's surprising and fun. That's a really fun memoir, too, because it's written in all these little, almost like flash pieces. And so it moves really fast, and she's fabulous.
I love reading memoirs. I don't know if it's the time of my life or whatever, but I just love reading about people's journeys. So
yeah, me too. Yeah, what's a memoir that you've loved lately?
Oh, gosh. Well, I read Alan Cummings' memoir, My Father's Son. Mm-hmm. Oh, my God, it was brutal. And then, of course, I just read Reina Grande's, your former student's memoir.
I love that book.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. Do you have any final comments that you would like to share?
I just wanted to thank you so much, Silvana, for having me, and thanks to people for listening. And I hope you find something really fabulous to read.
Thanks again for coming on to Voces Críticas.